Creative are back with another set of True Wireless earbuds. The Outlier V3, as the 9met suggests, are the third iteration within the lineup, and is reviewing me seeing if it's actually worth its price tag, because in the UK it can be found for £65 and in the US it can be found for around $70, and that makes it quite a tasty proposition. So as we jump straight in, we're going to be talking about Bluetooth codec, and here it's slightly a shame to see that Creative have omitted the aptX codec, which was present in the Outlier V1 and the Outlier V2. Indeed, here you're limited to the SBC and AC codecs only, and no matter what sort of driver configuration the manufacturer is using, in terms of the software limitations, in other words the codec support, does hinder in terms of Bluetooth transmission, and as such it's not as impressive as the likes of the predecessors and or what you can find out there in the market. Nevertheless, the 6mm biocellulose drivers that Creative is using has actually improved in terms of the overall sound frequency. Indeed, here the manufacturers opted to ditch the 5.6mm graphene coated drivers in favor of slightly larger drivers, and I think personally they've done a great job. So let's break it down in terms of the sound frequency range. First off, we're going to talk about the sub-bass response, that low-end rumble that you get in, let's say, watching movies and or listening to your favorite dance or R&B tracks. Here I feel the Outlier V3 do a phenomenal job at extending and prolonging that sub-bass extension, something that some of its competitors, say for example the likes of the Sennheiser earbuds, or for example other earphones that you can find out there on the market specifically at this budget price tag, just simply can't compete with. Now the same could be said about its mid-bass response. While the Outlier V1 and V2 were pretty good in this department, they were a little bit uncontrolled at times, specifically the version 1s. Here the V3s improve upon that and just give you the same sort of quantity, of course if you want it, because you can EQ it through the app, and we'll touch upon this further down in this review, but you've also got that fantastic quality, which isn't the same thing that could have been said about the version 1 iterations, or indeed some of its rivals out there on the market that offer quite a lot of bass but not that much quality, specifically again at this budget price tag. Now the praise continues when it comes to its mid-range, which isn't something I was expecting. While the V2s improved upon the V1s, I feel that the V3s even further improve in terms of the overall mid-range response. Now don't get me wrong, it's not quite Sennheiser-esque in terms of producing quite a mid-centric tone, but it still does much better in comparison to its predecessors and or what else you can find out there on the market. So much so that I would classify these as more mid-sounding earphones that I was actually anticipating. They compete with the likes of, let's say, the Sennheiser earbuds or more expensive Jabra earphones out there on the market. And in comparison to other earphones, so for example from the likes of One More or Oppo, these sound far better in the mid-range response, to the point where they actually compete far above their overall price tag suggests. And as for the highs, yet again the V3s improve upon their predecessors. Here the V2s were a little bit too sibilant, and the V1 sounded a little bit tailed off at the top end. The V3s extend very much like their predecessors, the V2s, but instead of being very sibilant, you can equalize it. And in my case, I dropped that treble quite significantly, and as a result meant that I had absolutely no problems when it comes to ear fatigue. Of course, this is very subjective and it really depends in terms of your own hearing sensitivity, but at least to my ears, I found that the V3s were a lot more agreeable and therefore meant that I could even listen to music a little bit louder if I wanted to. And finally, we get onto the Soundstage, and here I've always praised the Outlier Air specifically for their price point, and or even if you go for a price point which is far above it, here the Outlier Air compete with the likes of even flagship tier earphones when it comes to overall soundstage and width and depth. And thankfully nothing has changed in this department. The V3 still produce a very airy and wide soundstage, and one that will definitely keep you engaged. Instrument separation is very good, although not as impressive as the likes of, for example, the Jabra earphones, or for example the likes of ones which come from Oppo, but still they're up there with the very best, and at this price point I've got absolutely no complaints. Far from it, I've actually got only praise to sing about its Soundstage reproduction. Now, with the sound quality out of the way, I should also quickly reference hissing. Now, the reason I mention this is because in the Outlier Air V2s, there was a significant amount of hissing, specifically when there was no music playing. And the same couldn't be quite said about the Outlier Air V1, although you could hear it to a slight degree, it wasn't noticeable, at least not to that degree. Now, thankfully, the Outlier Air V3 have no hissing whatsoever, and therefore means it's not going to distract you when you have no music playing, or for example when you don't have any calls, and or if you're listening to music at a very low volume. So whatever Creative have achieved over here, be it in terms of the chipset or the audio drivers, well, it should definitely be commended. And now we get on to recording quality, and everything you can hear right now is coming directly from the Outlier Air V3. What I will say subjectively is that it's very similar to the Outlier Air V2s and is therefore an improvement over the Outlier Air V1s. Now, in comparison to the rest of the market, what you'll find is that it does better some of its alternatives, although it still can't compete with the likes of, let's say, the Jabra Elite 75T, which at the time of making this video are far cheaper and much more affordable and very much in line with the price point that it comes in with the Outlier V3s. Speaking of which, here are the Jabra Elite 75Ts, which I've often used as a reference in my videos, and as such, hopefully you'll agree with me that the Jabras just sound, on the whole, a little bit better than their creative alternatives. Now, just for comparison, here are the Outlier Air V1s, and hopefully you'll be able to hear slight differences in comparison to the V3s and the V1s. And what I will say subjectively, having heard back my test recordings, is that the V3s come out on top. Now, there's a feature that Creative have added on terms of the Outlier V3, specifically in comparison to the Outlier V2s or V1s, and that is active noise reduction. So it's not quite active noise cancellation, but it therefore uses the same sort of technologies, at least from my understanding of it. Now, regardless over here, I will say it's just a kind of throwaway feature. By that I mean that it will reduce some exterior noise, but it's nowhere near in comparison to the likes of earphones that actually have proper active noise cancellation. Here in this department, if you're looking for fantastic active noise cancellation and you're on a budget, you might want to look at some One More earphones which offer fantastic ANC quality even at a budget price point. Nevertheless, it's nice to see that Creative have included the feature if those people want to use it, and in my case, when I was doing my test, I didn't notice any significant differences in terms of the overall sound quality that you are getting with ANC on or off. So I did reference the app quite a few times, so let's get into it. As you can see, when you launch it up, it gives you the left and right indicator in terms of the battery remaining, and then you've got the equalizer. Now, often what you'll find is the actual equalizer, despite you having set it, will be disabled. I'm not really sure if this is to do with a bug through the app, but nevertheless I can say that the equalizer does work as intended. You can see here at the top left it is selected as onboard, and the actual onboard is actually my own profile, which I've named dubbed, so it should actually show up on terms of that. It should be showing dubbed rather than onboard. But nevertheless, aside from this, the actual equalizer gives you a full array of customizability, and of course it's very subjective, but you can see over here I've increased a few notches in terms of the lower mids, decreased a little bit on the mid bass, and decreased quite substantially in terms of the highs. But again, as I said, this really depends on your own hearing range, so you can just play around with it. As for noise control, you do have the active noise reduction. You can also adjust the different levels, and the same could be said about the ambient mode, where you can adjust that as well. And you can also have these two modes running or completely disabled when you're on a phone call, which I think is a nice little touch. Speaking about touch, the earphones do have touch sensitive buttons, so they've gotten rid of the Outlier V1's physical buttons and opted to go with what the Outlier V2s did, and therefore integrated touch functionalities. I had absolutely no problems when it comes to registering touch input, and I think the overall sensitivity and the functionalities are definitely great. Through the app you can see that you've got double tap, triple tap, and also long tap functionalities. You can customize in terms of media playback and or noise control or voice assistance, while if you go for the long tap you've also got the volume up and down functionalities. Ultimately, the app is a definitely great inclusion and one that definitely complements the earphones. Now, further to this, these earphones also do integrate the Super X-Fi technology, which gives you a quite spacious sound, and that's if you of course want to use it. You'll have to do a head mapping, which as you can see I've done previously in the past, and therefore has saved it and still uses it across all the different Creative devices, and therefore means that you can listen to music and enable or disable the Super X-Fi technology by a touch of a button. If you can see over here, I've also got it over there. Now, the only thing to be mindful about over here is that the Super X-Fi technology isn't exactly present on on all certain apps, and therefore is pretty limited to the app functionality through the Super X-Fi app only. So this is one of the limitations, but it's nice to see again this feature included. You don't have to use it if you don't want to. Now moving on, we get onto the build quality and design, and what I should also mention over here is that the earphones can be used independently from each other. In other words, they've got a mono format, so therefore the left can be used independently from the right driver. And as for the little LEDs that flash around the earphones, when they're in use they're not going to be present, which is a definite plus point in comparison to some of its predecessors and or some of the alternatives you can find out there on the market. Now, as for the overall comfort and the feel of them, I have no problems whatsoever. These earphones are slightly larger than what other earphones you can find out there in the rival marketplace, and in comparison to their V1 predecessors, they're definitely a little bit more slender, very much in line with what the V2s offered. As such, I have no problems whatsoever, and they offer good passive noise isolation, therefore blocking out exterior sound without actually using any sort of technology. Now, there's different tips also included within the package, and they're more like regular silicon tips, where the V1s had very shallow tips which some people couldn't get along with. I had no problems personally, but I just thought to comment on it because I did see that in the comment section of my V1 review. Now elsewhere, in terms of the battery life, the earphones will last up to 10 hours, which is really impressive. It's not as impressive as its predecessors, but will definitely suffice for a lot of individuals. But with the charging case, you get up to 40 hours of playback, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. Furthermore, the charging case also has got QI wireless charging capabilities, which is a definite plus point in comparison to its predecessors, and it's also got a USB Type-C input, which enables fast charging. There's little LEDs on the side of the case as well, which gives you a small little indication as to the remaining charge of the earphones and or the case. Now, I should also mention that these earphones are IPX5 certified, which means they've got certain dust and water resistance, but of course they're not waterproof. Nevertheless, here, if you're going on a light jog, you won't have to worry about these earphones getting damaged. Now, speaking of which, if you're going to go on heavy gym workouts or something like that, I wouldn't quite suggest these earphones due to the overall size and form factor of them, but of course that's quite subjective. Personally, if I was going to be doing certain workouts with earphones in, I'd be looking for ones with a slightly smaller form factor and or an over-the-ear design. And so this brings me on to my verdict of the Outlier Air V3s. Are there improvements over its predecessors? Absolutely. I think Creative should be really commended for the overall package that they've provided. And while it will annoy some, including myself, to see that the manufacturer has omitted the aptX codec, otherwise than that, they are really a faultless product. Across the board, they do fantastic in terms of sound quality, recording quality, app functionality, battery life, and even in terms of overall design and aesthetics. There's very little to really complain about over here, and as such it's extremely easy to recommend these earphones, especially at their price tag, and as a result they get my Best Buy award. Now, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts of these earphones down in the comment section below. Would you buy them, and or have you already bought them? If so, what do you make of them? Now, if you've liked this independent detailed review and want to see more from the channel, and if you haven't already, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.